John Falchicchio, Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. On behalf of Mayor Bowser, I want to welcome you to DMPED's Recovery Weekly Check-In. Got a little tongue-tied there. Today, we're actually going to have a very important discussion as we continue with Black History Month about racial equity, both what we're doing inside the government and with our partners outside the government in order to overcome the systematic racism and injustices that have plagued us for too long. And so we've got some important partners with us here today, and I want to get right to it and bring in one of our partners. As you know, the mayor has really pushed hard to make sure that throughout the pandemic, we were doing all that we could to support our local businesses. And one of our partners in that work is the council member from Ward 5, who also chairs the Committee on Economic Development. And we wanted to bring him into the conversation and talk to us a little bit about what he's worked on the council in order to advance equity. So with that, I'll go to Councilmember Kenya McDuffie.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you, Deputy Mayor Falchicchio, as well as the Mayor Bowser and the team at DIRT for inviting me to participate in today's recovery conversation. I'm especially pleased to be on this panel with Director Tim White, Dr. Andre Perry, Rosen Allen Herring, and my good friend Corey Griffin. As many of the folks who are viewing this know well, there are many pressing economic and equity issues that must be addressed in our city. And I appreciate the opportunity to really discuss these with you all today. As the Deputy Mayor mentioned, I'm Kenya McDuffie. I represent Ward 5 on the Council of the District of Columbia and also the Council's Chair Pro Tem. And importantly, I'm the Chair of the Committee on Business and Economic Development. I've been on the Council since 2012, and I've been a Washingtonian my entire life. There are some significant racial disparities here in the city that really permeate every indicator for success, including in healthcare, housing, education, criminal justice system, and importantly, economic opportunities. And so these issues aren't new, and by some metrics, they aren't getting much better. Today in D.C., a white family has a median net worth 81 times larger than that of a black family. We have one of the largest racial wealth gaps in the country. And this pre-pandemic was an extremely strong fiscal position that we had in the District of Columbia with a $3 billion budget surplus, record low unemployment, widespread economic development, and things were looking really, really solid. And yet black residents own less than 14% of the district's businesses and aren't really sharing as much in the prosperity. And so this conversation is so important that we're having today. One of the lessons that I hope that people are learning as we celebrate Black History Month is that really centuries of slavery, segregation, government-sponsored discrimination prevented black Americans from accessing the same economic and wealth-building opportunities that others enjoyed. And I've been really working hard to advance racial equity legislation and will continue to do so and really prioritize targeted economic investments in black communities during the upcoming budget season at the council. Last year, the council unanimously passed the Racial Equity Achieve Results Act and launched the new council office on racial equity in January. The REACH Act is a comprehensive measure that will ensure our work is intentionally more equitable moving forward. The new council office is going to score legislation for its impact on racial equity and provide a framework we need to address systemic racism in our government. The legislation also creates an Office of Racial Equity for the executive branch, and I was excited to see Mayor Bowser announce the search for her chief equity officer a few weeks ago, and so I look forward to seeing this new office launch in the future. I recently worked with Mayor Bowser and Deputy Mayor Falchicchio to introduce a new priority status designation for equity impact enterprises, which are locally based small businesses that are owned by people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. Some of the new requests for proposals for development projects in the city are already using this new designation, which prioritizes equity impact enterprises on certain contracts. And thanks to this action, more minority-owned businesses hopefully will be able to share in the district's prosperity and access procurement opportunities. Last budget cycle, we created an equity impact fund that provides access to capital for economically and socially disadvantaged businesses. We also funded a disparity study, and I know that the deputy mayor is working hard with his team. And we want that provide a data-driven evidence needed to establish public policy goals that are going to help and benefit black and brown people and entrepreneurs in their request for equitable contract procurement opportunities. Another area I want to see DC make some progress on is support minority-owned banks that are more likely to lend to diverse business owners. And in the fiscal year 21 budget, with the support of the council, we made a $1 million investment in one of the only district chartered banks that we have in the city, and we're soon to see hopefully the benefits of that effort. There are two final items, if I could briefly highlight with the fiscal year 21 budget. First, we secured $200,000 in recurring funds for the DC Anchor Partnership Program, which focuses on increasing procurement opportunities for DC-based minority-owned businesses, and it's operated through CNHED with the support of the Deputy Mayor's Office and Anchor Institutes throughout the District of Columbia, including some of our hospitals and universities. Second, we won $3 million for investment to support the advancement and preservation of go-go music, history, and culture as well. And these measures expand economic opportunities for our local entrepreneurs and help us retain the district's homegrown genre and its cultural identity. In January, we introduced a reparations bill that's going to create, if passed, a reparations foundation fund to really explore some of the concerns and the history around the chattel slavery in our country and in the District of Columbia, and what opportunities there may be to advance that. And moving forward, I'm focused on eliminating the racial wealth gap by passing policies, expanding programs, and providing resources that really lift up underserved communities and try to fundamentally change the structures and institutions that have led us to this moment in time where significant racial inequities persist in the nation's capital. And so I really appreciate, again, this opportunity to be with you all this evening, and I look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councilmember. And we've got folks watching on Twitter, Facebook, Channel 16, on Mayor.dc.gov/live. So if you're on social media and you want to join the conversation, have any questions, Councilmember, I thought of a couple questions for you that we'll come back to you on. But if you use the hashtag DCHope, it'll allow us to see the questions on Twitter or in the Facebook chat. And then if you're on the phone line, you could actually press 0, and that will get you queued into the conversation. And we're going to bring Councilmember McDuffie back into the conversation in a bit. But next up, we have Dr. Andre Perry, who is at the Brookings Institution, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the work that he has done. He's the author of a new book called Know Your Price. He joined us last year at the beginning of the pandemic to talk about how we had to focus on equity as we navigated through the pandemic. And as you know, DC Hope, actually, HOPE stands for Health, Opportunity, Prosperity, and Equity. So Dr. Perry, I want to hear a little bit about your work and how we can improve in our work on equity. So with that, I'll turn to you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I want to thank Mayor Bowser and Councilperson McDuffie for their tireless work in this area. As we know from this summer that we have work to do, and business development, home ownership, and other areas of wealth development is certainly needed. But I want to begin my presentation by acknowledging what day this is. This is Mardi Gras Day, and for those who are from the Caribbean or who lived in New Orleans, like I did for so long, happy Carnival, happy Mardi Gras for everyone out there.
So Dr. Perry, Dr. Perry, I don't want to interrupt you, but you were already winning Room Raider with those pillows behind you. Now you're one-upping us with the beads as well.
You know, I'm trying to represent the culture. Culture is an asset. We talk about so many different assets and what to invest in, but we need to invest in our culture. In my book, Know Your Price, I talk about investing in go-go, because go-go is investing in us. And then, so it's only right for us to return the favor by making sure those entrepreneurs in go-go are properly compensated and invested in. But this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. You know, for the descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States, entrepreneurship represents more than just owning a business and pursuing the proverbial American dream. Instead, it's the ability for Black people to participate in local, regional, and global markets. It represents a dream deferred by systemic racism and discrimination we were once owned. So a measure of our progression in society is how much do we own? And so I'm going to actually delve into a lot of this data. Now, a lot of people know me and my work from housing and business. Well, I typically start off by talking about housing because most people start their businesses using the equity in their home. And we know across the region, Black home ownership across the country is down, with the exception of Black millennials. They're looking up across the country. But home ownership is down, and the value of homes in Black neighborhoods are down. Across the country, the average loss is about difference between Black homes or homes in Black neighborhoods where the share of the Black population is greater than 50% is 23% less, or 48,000 less than their neighborhoods where the share of the Black population is less than 1%. And that's after controlling for education, crime, walkability. That's but in the D.C. metro in particular, there's a 15% difference between homes in Black neighborhoods, equating to about a $48,000 difference between homes in Black neighborhoods and homes in white neighborhoods in the D.C. metro. So one of the reasons why we have fewer businesses overall is because we're getting less value from our homes. And whenever we see any declines in home ownership, you're going to probably see declines in business ownership. So I say that to say we still need to talk about housing. I'm going to talk about business, but we always have to talk about housing as well. But to start, I'm going to ask the team to put up some slides, because I want to show you that if we invest in Black businesses, we're actually investing in the entire regional economy. So if you could put up those slides for me.
So, and
please,
we have,
in
DC, Black businesses are underrepresented. That's the first slide I see up.
Okay, so that's the first one. Thank you. So in the D.C. metro, not D.C., because we know that percentage is higher in D.C., but the D.C. metropolitan area, Black people make up 27% of the region. But Black businesses are only 6% of the 110,000 employer businesses, meaning businesses with more than one employee. Now, if we were to reach parity, meaning if Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, we would add essentially 32,000 more Black businesses in the region. Next slide, please. Now, currently, Black businesses bring in an average yearly revenue in the region of about $1.7 million a year, compared to non-Black businesses that bring in $7.7 million a year. If Black businesses increase their average wage revenue to that of non-Black businesses, we would increase the total revenue by those businesses by $41 billion. $41 billion added to the economy. Next slide, please. Now, we know that Black businesses generate jobs, but on average, they level out about 13 jobs per firm, compared to 24 for non-Black businesses. If we reach parity in those regards, we would add 80,000 more jobs to the regional economy. Next slide, please. Now, in regards to pay, again, Black businesses pay their employees an average about $44,000 in the region. If they reached what non-Black businesses pay, we would see an increase in pay, putting $1.7 billion in people's pockets. $1.7 billion. Now, next slide, please. If Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, and increase their employment to the level of non-black businesses, they would create more than or close to 900,000 jobs in the region. So this is a big boom, a big opportunity to create more employer businesses, meaning we need more businesses with more than one employee. Now, next slide, please. Now, we know that most businesses are sole proprietorship. So if we're going to convert if we're going to reach that goal, we're going to have to convert a lot of these sole proprietorships. There are 150,000 black sole proprietorships in the region, and they bring in a total of $3 billion. If this revenue of black entrepreneurs were to be leveraged, it would be possible to grow the pool of potential black businesses. So we have got to turn these sole proprietorships into employer businesses. And where should we do that? Currently, most black businesses are in certain areas. We're in laundry services, transportation services. We're not in the high growth revenue generating streams of manufacturing, of utility, certain tech sectors. And so as we're thinking about investing in black businesses, we should not just pick any black businesses. I just want to throw out a stat to you. There are only 18 of black-owned businesses in new utility. Only 18 in one of the highest grossing revenue stream employers in the country in the utilities. Only 18 in that sector. And so we need to be clear that we should not just create funds and invest in black businesses in general. And that's what we're seeing across the country. Companies spreading these funds like peanut butter over a large area of land. We need to target it to businesses that will employ more people, that will serve government and private industry, and also crack the ceiling of these high growth revenue generating fields. So I'm going to end the slide deck, but I wanted to present that to you. I didn't want to show a bunch of disparities. I really wanted to show the opportunity. That there's this notion that if we invest in black people, that we're somehow taking away from white folks. No, I study underappreciated assets, meaning if you just add water, it will grow. Now, the underappreciated asset in our community, in the DMV, is black business. And so when we invest in black business and we see growth, the entire pie increases. And that's our opportunity to say, hey, let's support black businesses, and at the same time, let's support regional growth. So I'm going to end it there, and I'm looking forward to a conversation.
Well, thank you for that. And really, I saw a lot of head nodding as you were going through the statistics. So I want to get to the conversation very quickly, but I also want to bring in Tim White, who's the Director of Equitable Development in DMPED, to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in DMPED specifically to enhance equity.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tim White. I'm the Director of Equitable Development, as the Deputy Mayor just said. And today I will provide a few updates around what DMPED has been doing towards working for food access, as well as an update on the Equity Rfp initiative that was launched this past summer. And so, starting with food access, in Washington, D.C., improving food access is improving racial equity. And Mayor Bowser has continued to make resolving this a priority. And DMPED has had the opportunity to lead and participate in many interagency efforts that have gotten us to this point. And so Ward 7 and 8 will double the number of full-service grocery stores that are in it in the next 18 months. They will be adding 3 new grocery stores by next summer. Many of you saw last week with Mookie's Market that will be opening in Ward 7. Good Foods Market that will be opening in Ward 8 in Bellevue, and Lidl that will open at Safeway next year. Also, DHS announced last year that the partnership with Amazon, that SNAP delivery would be rolling out online in partnership with Amazon through the pandemic. Also, ABRA recently announced that, or recently worked on legislation that was introduced that will offer incentives to grocery stores opening in Ward 7 and 8 using their licensing process. Last week, also, Nourish DC was announced, and the big thing with Nourish DC is that it will drive us to develop more locally homegrown small businesses that are in the food service industry. And one that is a personal, one that I'm personally excited about, as Dr. Perry was talking about data and talking about appreciating the asset, using data to attract for tenant attraction east of the river, to tell the real story of our communities. Significant parts of Ward 7 and 8 are considered low income and low access areas by USDA. And as many know, Ward 7 and 8 are majority African American at 92 and 89%. And while the USDA standard says one thing about our neighborhoods in terms of income, our research has found that our neighborhood spent over $570 million in 2018 on groceries with 3 stores. And so information like that is what we will continue to work and dig into, to where when we have conversations with grocery stores, they don't use the traditional factors to tell the story about our communities that are about household income and degree level. And so we look forward to continuing that effort. Next slide. And so the Equity RFP update. Many of you all saw the August, I believe 4th update that talked about this announcement. And we shared that on July 15th, the mayor announced a new strategy that would enhance equity to make DC's prosperity more inclusive, using an equity inclusion prioritization that we added to our request for proposals, or RFPs, at DMPED. And just as a recap for folks, the DMPED is prioritizing proposals that maximize by percentage of ownership and control entities designated as disadvantaged enterprises, or DBEs, and resident-owned businesses, or entities including nonprofits and community institutions led by or controlled by individuals designated as socially disadvantaged under the SBA, the Small Business Administration, or SBA definition. And so our first RFP with the Equity RFP was the Langston and Slater schools. Those schools were constructed in 1891 and 1902 for African American students. And we're excited to say that the development community responded very well to that RFP, and we received 10 proposals that presented to the community last week. So we look forward to moving this project along. Next slide. And so what's next? What's next is we have 3 solicitations that are still underway along with Langston Slater. They are the Malcolm X School, Reeves Center, and Hill East. And we will be working to make to improve this process and learn from the lessons from these different projects. And so one of the things that we've already learned that many of us know working in the community is that consistency is what everyone asks for. And typically when we talk about in this space, we talk about businesses, but if the community has asked for consistency, they appreciate this equitable RFP that is taking place. They appreciate that the community is seeing that the businesses that look like them are being a part of the process. And so we're super excited that the mayor and deputy mayor have made sure that this is going to be something that sticks around. And so what we will be working to do is look at the numbers and find out who is applying, who's not applying, how we improve this. And we will be asking those questions and examining it, trying to make it better, and working with the community and obviously Councilmember McDuffie's office to get that done.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim, for that presentation. More work ahead, but glad to have you next to us as we push forward on this. I want to bring in 2 more of our guests who joined us today to give their perspective on this work and the importance of this work. So I want to bring in first Rosie Ellen Herring, who is the president and CEO of the United Way of the National Capital Area, as well as Corey Griffin, who's a business owner and a founding board member of the Greater Washington Black Chamber of Commerce. And they're two of my favorite people, but I got to say one is more favorite than the other. So with that, Rosie, if you could tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing, because you mix both business and philanthropy in order to advance equity. So if you could tell us a little bit about some of that work.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor, and I certainly thank you and Mayor Bowser for your leadership and what you continue to do every day on behalf of the citizens of the District of Columbia. Your United Way of the National Capital Area is truly proud to not only serve this region, and we do it with a level of philanthropy, but also by bringing economic development to the table as well. For me, in my background, it really is not just philanthropy. Having come to United Way now 7 years ago, I spent 21 years previously with Fannie Mae. So when I saw Mr. White talk about the economic development piece and certainly the housing, he was speaking to my spirit there, because we recognize that that is the absolute way that we build our communities back. So when we think about equity and what Your United Way has been doing over the past now 7 years since my tenure, it's really been about rebranding and transformation. And where we find ourselves in this moment, certainly no one saw COVID coming. We didn't have that crystal ball. And when we found ourselves in the moment, we certainly could not have anticipated that it would last as long as it has. But at the end of the day, we look at the work that we've been doing around education, financial stability, and health. Those are our three key areas where we put a lot of the focus and a lot of the investment. One of those areas is what we call our community commitment. And that was a 5-year effort where we committed to invest $12.3 million in supporting many of our middle school students, certainly health-related issues for many of those young families, as well as looking at economic development. And we launched our financial empowerment centers. And we now have, we are about to open our 5th financial empowerment center for this entire region. And so in looking at that, it's really about bringing the resources to the people and meeting them where they are. And we're very proud of the work that we've been able to serve over 10,000 individuals, and certainly getting to over 100,000 individuals who are either unbanked, underbanked, and having access to mainstream services to get them away from the trends that typically keep many in our community in that cycle of poverty. We have now launched that 5-year commitment, Deputy Mayor, ended June 30th of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. But July 1st of 2020, we launched our next 5-year commitment, which is a $15 million investment that we've committed over the next 5 years to ensure that we bring that to bear. And in doing so, while at the same time, when we found ourselves in the crisis, Your United Way certainly was able to pivot quickly to launch or relaunch our emergency assistance fund during COVID, where we were there to help many of our families. And just in a short period of time of about really 2 months, we were able to distribute over $2 million to families for emergency services that ranged from food insecurity. Certainly, as time went on, we were able to understand that many of our children did not have access to nutritious meals because they weren't in school. And now we're, of course, coming up almost a year where many of our children haven't had the formal instruction. They haven't been in a formal learning environment. And we know the detriment that that has to their ability to learn. And never mind that there were challenges there before crisis even evolved, before COVID even came. There were many of the challenges that existed in our community. I'd like to believe that basically, COVID simply exacerbated those existing challenges that were in our community. We will continue to do the work that we've been doing, and a part of that second 5-year commitment is what we call Stand for Equity. It is Your United Way putting a stake in the ground, calling it what it is, and ensuring that we bring all of the resources to the table in terms of looking at what equity means when it comes to education for many of our students, many of them in challenging environments and in challenging communities, but have the capacity and the ability certainly to learn and to thrive. We certainly will continue to look at economic development issues where we want to see many of our small businesses thrive. We want to ensure that we give access to VITA services, earned income tax credit services, business plan, and all of that support that we do in our financial empowerment centers. And of course, we want to look at health. You know, when Councilman McDuffie was sharing his statistics, we typically tend to think of this Washington region, and Dr. Perry did so as well, as being very affluent. And very, you know, and not very much need. 6 of the top 10 highest earning incomes are in this area. It's known to have low unemployment. Certainly, there are high paying jobs that are here. But for those who can't access those services, the gap is phenomenal. And so what we choose to do as Your United Way is to try to bridge that gap using data-driven, evidence-based programming to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our citizens where they are, and to then be able to look back and say that we've had the impact that we intended to have. And we do that in partnership with the public-private sector and certainly even with our fellow funders that are a part of this larger community. I'll end with just saying that the work continues. We still find ourselves in this crisis. We're partnering with the faith-based community around what we call Choose Healthy Life, where we are looking to bring the services of making certain that many of our African-American predominantly communities who have a hesitancy in understanding and certainly accepting science and what it can mean, to help them understand that while we may be disproportionately impacted with the health outcomes that tend to bear from this crisis, and we are dying at a larger number, we want to ensure that we go to trusted advisors and make certain that we're able to share this information in an environment that is not only trusted, but accepted, and then inspires our community to act. And so we're continuing to do that to not only bring the testing to bear, but also now, as vaccinations become more available, to encourage our community to take advantage of them. So I thank you again, Deputy Mayor. Look forward to the conversation with the great panelists that I have here. I guess I'm the lone lady having to hold it down, but it's okay. I'm ready and looking forward to it. So thank you again for the time.
You may be the only lady, but you are unmatched on this panel. I will tell you that. And to evidence that, I'm going to bring in Corey Griffin to the conversation. Corey, you've been doing work as a business person, but then you launched the Greater Washington Black Chamber of Commerce. Tell us about how that's been going and how folks can get involved as well.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I want to greet the mayor as well, and then Councilmember McDuffie for all of his great work. Dr. Perry, you're amazing. I have a slight disagreement with you. And you brought a prop, and I brought one too, because we support local black business here in the District of Columbia. So let me start by saying this. We started the Greater Washington Black Chamber in July of 2019. And really it was born out of this urgency to focus on the state of black business in the District of Columbia. We see prosperity, notwithstanding COVID. We had a booming economy, and we saw the demographics shifting and changing, which for our membership means that there can be both positive impact to business and in some cases negative impact. We saw what happened on H Street with many of our black-owned businesses, the demographic shift, consumer attitudes change or evolve perhaps with those changes. And we were hearing from many entrepreneurs like myself that there needed to be a particular concern around the state of black business. So we launched right away. Now, I've spent most of my professional career in other places, not as an entrepreneur. I spent 15 years at Microsoft. I spent a few years in the Obama administration. Really, and in all of that work, while it was not my primary role, I have been focused on this issue of making certain that black and brown and women-owned businesses have an opportunity to be engaged. And so we did that. We brought that spirit with us to launch the Greater Washington Black Chamber of Commerce. Now, I'm not going to be able to match Dr. Perry's academician approach to the data. But we have data as well. And we know that 8 out of 10 black businesses fail within about 18 months. Can you imagine that COVID has actually exacerbated that? It's hard to imagine that there could be even further damage to the community around black business. We are fortunate that we are here to try to focus on networking, bringing the black business community together to help facilitate engagement with each other and with other opportunities in the private sector and in the government sector. We are also here to help with advocacy. We focus a great deal with working with the government to support legislation and the laws that help promote, in general, a healthy business and climate. We work with partners like the Federal City Council, the D.C. Chamber of Commerce, Greater Washington Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, but other business concern as well. And so we understand the need to respond, but we also know well enough that there is a particular concern to pay attention to around the health and wellness of black business, so we do that. We also are driven by the need to focus on the access to capital issue. which for many of our businesses, and Dr. Perry spoke to this, we suffer from the lack of access to adequate equity or capital to be able to fund our businesses. And so oftentimes, even when we do find capital, it costs us a lot more. And we never get quite enough of it. And so those are all things that help to perpetuate the failure of black businesses. We start with about a third less of capital than white businesses. And it is particularly difficult for our businesses to raise private investment, which leads me to my last and final point in my opening, which is really about the need for the Greater Washington Black Chamber of Commerce and others to partner together, to partner with government, to really solve these problems in a way that helps us to grow the economy so that we can get to the numbers that Dr. Perry spoke to, so that we can begin to engage around the things that Councilmember McDuffie and his colleagues are working on every day. And so, Deputy Mayor, I appreciate this opportunity to be here. We care deeply about this issue. We're working on it every day. And many of the board members are entrepreneurs ourselves. We know what it takes to start a business. We know what failure looks like. We know what getting up after you fall down. And it is also very difficult for us day to day to manage this because we've got some significant challenges with our constituency. We're committed to it. We look forward to continuing to working with you and the mayor and the city to help us have a stronger, more vibrant black business community in the District of Columbia.
Well, thank you, Corey. And what we want to do is bring some of our viewers into the conversation as well. So there are some callers that are teed up. Also, if you're on social media and you want to join the conversation, use the hashtag DCHope on Twitter, or if you're on Facebook as well, or put it into the Facebook chat. So first up, I want to bring in a caller who has a question for us. It's William in Ward 1. William, can you hear us? Your line should be open now.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor. I think this is a very significant and important conversation, and I really appreciate it. My question is whether or not the council or the mayor is going to propose any form of legislation or policy to address the issues that D.C. residents face in terms of their equity with getting employment opportunities in Washington, D.C. As you're aware, that many of our Maryland and Virginia residents have opportunities that are abound in the district. 75% of the hospital workers do not live in the district. Many of our police officers don't live in the district. So my question is, what policies or legislation is the mayor or the council planning to introduce this year or next year to address this equity issue?
No, it's a really important question. And I'm going to go to Councilmember McDuffie because I know he's doing some work on this. But when you think about some of the hiring that we've done, even in the course of the pandemic. So as you might know, we hired about 700 people for the DC Contract Trace Force. And when we did that, it was literally all of the contact tracers are DC residents. We were able to do that because DC does have, DC government has a resident preference. And so we were able to do that and execute that in a short amount of time. That's just one example, and we have to do more for it. We tighten it up with some of the work that Tim was talking about in terms of when we do developments to make sure that we have tight first source agreements so that DC residents are hired onto those projects so that it's not just the development team, but also the people who bring about the development as well, because we don't want to just develop our land. We want to build community. And so that's some of the work that we're doing at DMPED. But I know this is also something that Councilman McDuffie has worked on as well, so I want to turn to him and bring him into the conversation.
Thank you for that, John, and thank you for the question, William. A few things. I think first, just making sure that as we look at incentives that the government provides to attract businesses, making sure that we are holding them accountable for any of the hiring requirements that exist in those types of agreements. I think it's extraordinarily important that we look at traditionally how we've done certain types of tax incentives and other things to make sure that the outcomes align with those same values that the community and people like William are advocating for when we are really trying to seek those types of partnerships or bring those types of businesses to the District of Columbia. Secondly, I'd say that we need to make sure that we are looking at just other ways to really push the private sector as well. Every thing that we do to try to grow businesses and support hiring in the District of Columbia. It doesn't necessarily have to be government involved. I think about the partnership recently between the Washington Interfaith Network and PEPCO, where they expanded efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring. Looking at some of the projects that they're working on is something that, just another example where I think that we should be pushing, and particularly me, I hold myself accountable as chair of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, to make sure that we're asking these types of questions when we have oversight, when we're engaged in these types of larger corporations to see what types of things they're doing to hire. I think I want to push more on some of these companies, the types of board makeup, the people who are in decision-making roles. I think about Rosie and all the great work that she's done at Fannie Mae, the work that she's doing now. But the roles of people like Rosie and others on boards of these types of companies is extraordinarily important. And to making sure that we are pushing in that area. And then, I think the point that Dr. Perry and Corey made earlier, we need to look at minority-owned businesses and really supporting greater opportunities to grow existing businesses, particularly those that demonstrate a capacity to scale up and hire more people, but also supporting additional entrepreneurship and the creation of businesses owned by Black and brown people in the District of Columbia. Because guess what? And Dr. Perry has these numbers and knows better than most that if you really want to address some of the unemployment problems that we're seeing in communities of color across the district, then it's likely to be those minority-owned businesses who are going to hire those folks. And so we've got to demonstrate greater support and investment in minority-owned business in the District of Columbia, which is why I think it's really important to support the institutions like minority-owned banks, CDFIs, and others that are allowing capital to flow from these businesses as well. And so those are just a few things that I think I would mention to respond to William's question.
No, definitely.
Can I just add?
Yeah, definitely.
Can I just add? Yeah. And I think the question should be not so much how can we hire DC folks, but why we should develop all communities in the city. Because when you do that, you can see that spatially you need equity as well. This is not just about racial equity. This is about making sure that folks in Southeast can get access to jobs. And so for me, it's about saying, hey, do we want neighborhoods to develop the way they should develop? Or do we want general productivity? I choose community because ultimately if our entire community, all the communities are thriving, then the entire region thrives. And so we need to do a much better job of saying, hey, we need to develop places where Black people are underrepresented. And we clearly see that 7th and 8th Ward are underrepresented in so many areas. So we need to target our initiatives to make sure there's representation in those places.
Deputy Mayor, may I chime in just a bit? I would like to add that I think we have to also be very intentional about those design models. So progress, yes, and we've witnessed that. And I think some of the challenges that when we see growth in a community, there's oftentimes displacement, physical displacement, but there's also this cultural displacement. And so I would challenge us to think about how we grow communities with intentionality to make certain that those communities of color that have been there, that need to rely on a thriving constituency and community of commerce, that we really think about how to do that and not just have buildings erected around communities that ultimately suffer the Black-owned dry cleaner or the barbershop, right? Because they no longer can exist there because of sometimes the physical displacement that happens, but then also it begins to erode at the cultural frameworks that are in these communities. So I know we think about all of this stuff in the context of equity and the prosperity that we're seeing in the city. I think we need to take a step back as we are sort of in the middle of all of this and really be thoughtful about how we design it such that those communities coexist with growth and thrive and grow with growth and not be suffered, their revenues be diminished, because we've seen it. We've seen it in these corridors, Rhode Island Avenue. We've seen black-owned barbershops that were there for 40 and 50 years just go away because there's not enough community there any longer to support them. So I would really compel us to think about ways with government and with the chamber and other partners to really think about how we might co-design intentionality into our progress plans in the city.
Rosie, did you?
Just very briefly, just to say, I appreciate what Mr. Griffin is saying, and he's absolutely right. We have to be intentional. And when we look at, displacement, that generally comes because many of our, those in our community don't quite know how to access those resources that allow them to be successful where they are. As an alumna of Howard University, and I look at LaDroit Park and what has occurred in LaDroit Park, and as a Fannie Mae exec at the time, we saw, gentrification is not a bad word unless you make it a bad word. No, city or municipality can live without a tax base. We know we need that. But it's also a matter of looking at equitably. And when I think of equity, it's not just race. We talk about it from a race standpoint, but equity is about thought, gender, and perspective, and it's about bringing all of those to the table to ensure that we're looking across. It certainly isn't equality, which I've had several conversations around correcting that thought, and I'm sure Dr. Perry probably corrects them every day on what the difference is between equality and certainly what equity is. But I would say when we look at where we are as a region, and knowing all of the assets that we have in our midst and dispelling a lot of the myths that are here about what Washington is or is not. It is not simply a political town. There are people who live here. I've lived here now since, I won't say how long because then it'll tell you how old I am, but I will tell you I've been here long enough and I've never been a quote unquote federal government employee. So everybody doesn't work for the federal government in Washington. The city doesn't empty out every 4 years. There are people who have made their lives here in second and third generations who have been here that we have to ensure that we're looking at the space that they've created culturally for us that allows us to come here and take advantage of all that we see. So it is absolutely something that is incumbent upon us. It's something that we have to look at with the lens of not just, again, racial, but it's really looking at it across all of those spectrums. And I think when we comprehensively look at it, we know that there is so much more that needs to be done.
Well, and Dr. Perry, we had a question on Facebook that came in from Angela, and she talked about before this period of gentrification that the district experienced, it just seemed like, and it felt like, and it was that more black businesses existed. So how has that, and Rosie brought up gentrification, how has gentrification had an impact on the number of black businesses in D.C.?
Yeah, most businesses are started using the individual wealth of families. It's not even close. Only 1% of black businesses actually are founded using a loan. Now, that's because when home ownership drops, we see less collateral. Less collateral means less loan. Less collateral means less equity to start your business. That devaluation metric I shared at the beginning, that $156 billion in lost equity from black neighborhoods across the country would have financed more than 4 million black-owned businesses based on the average amount blacks used to start up businesses, and it would have financed more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average amount of a public four-year education. So I say that to say that we also need to remove the drag of racism from our city. It is clear that we have talent. It is clear that we have businesses that can scale, but we're not seeing the investment largely because of perception of those firms. I did another study where we scraped all the Yelp data across from businesses across the country. And what we found is that black, brown, and Asian businesses score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts in the aggregate. Meaning, and you used to hear our elders say this all the time, our ice is just as cold. Because they knew that if you distort the market in a way where you're not going to quality, high-quality businesses are forced to compete with low-quality businesses, and revenue is depressed also. And so we need to see those investment dollars, more customers. And by the way, actually, this goes to show you that people essentially avoid black people and in essence avoid quality. Some restaurants went up in revenue because they, instead of going to the Jamaican jerk chicken spot, they can order out, and they got that food delivered. So we need to also recognize that it's bias that's hurting black communities. I say this all the time. There's nothing wrong with black people that ending racism can't solve. At the end of the day, we have the talent. We have firms. We need the investment. So we need to leverage government as much as possible to make sure those investments go. We need to have larger private firms recognize the talent that's there. But we can't keep saying what's wrong with black people. Why can't they catch up? That just doesn't fly when you look at the data.
Well, really interesting that you brought up the where people go to start a business. Also, where people go to borrow to pay for college is another topic we've discussed before. Actually, last February, when we were actually able all to gather, we did an event at the Howard Theater with a group that is called Undesign the Red Line, where we talked about the racist policy that permeated the nation, but also the District of Columbia, and how that has caused the lack of property values and the associated equity that families earned from that property values in order to send generations of their children to college. So it's something that we have to work on, and it's so important that we focus on housing as one of the things that will drive equity forward. The other one is creating opportunity in all of our neighborhoods. So one of the initiatives Mayor Bowser has is to actually move our leased space for government east of the river so that we create more economic vitality in Wards 7 and 8. But I know that, Councilmember McDuffie, you've been working on two things that you mentioned, the Anchor program and the Disparity Study. A lot of times when people hear the word study, they think it's something, no offense, Dr. Perry, that goes and gets shelved. How is the Disparity Study an action more than just a study?
I appreciate the question, Deputy Mayor. The Disparity Study is incredibly important. Just a quick history. The District of Columbia used to have an MBE program, a Minority Business Enterprise Program. There was a lawsuit in around 1992 or so. The court overturned the program that we had, and it resulted in the current CBE program that the District of Columbia has, Certified Business Enterprise Program, which is race and gender neutral. And the Disparity Study is necessary, and actually the factual predicate that you need to withstand judicial scrutiny with trying to do an MBE program. I would like the district to move back to having a Minority Business Enterprise Program, and before you can do so, one of the necessary things you need is a disparity study that describes the conditions and whether there is an environment that is right for the district to identify race as a factor in having a sheltered market when it comes to procurement opportunities. And so that was funded. We did that in the budget this year. We did it last summer for the budget in FY 2021. And hopefully there'll be a contract identified soon to make that work get underway. I'll tell you, the other thing you mentioned, or maybe you didn't mention it, but it's incredibly important that you have that disparity study so that you can have more opportunities for minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses in the District of Columbia who historically have not had the same access to capital and the ability to really start a business and if you're fortunate to start a business, to grow that business and expand that business and hire more people. And so I'm focused like a laser on ensuring that that happens for all the reasons that you all have described a little earlier. I do want to say, one thing, and hopefully this will be received well with the intention that I say it. And I've heard it a couple times that this is more than about race or racial equity, and obviously that can be true. I want to caution us though from maybe moving this to a more general discussion about economic equity or economic inclusion. I talk about race, and I'm intentional about talking about race because of the complex history of slavery, Jim Crow, sharecropping, white affirmative action, to be clear, redlining we talked about, job discrimination, all that stuff, in some cases was blatant, but more recently is insidious enough where people some cases don't think it still exists or don't understand how it continues to extract value from communities of color. And so we have to call out race. Because when you look at the numbers that we've been talking about, the stark racial disparities that exist right here in our city, the common factor that weaves itself through all of those data points is race. And I would challenge folks to show me where Black people aren't on the bottom of all those indicators of success. And so I want to just sort of toss that out there because I think it's important not to dilute conversations about achieving racial equity by talking about diversity and other initiatives that I think over the years have proven to be unsuccessful in closing the disparities that have persisted for so long.
And if I could just add just very quickly that I agree with Councilman McDuffie in that regard, and going back to the study and the usefulness of studies, a disparity report becomes a lot more relevant when we have people demanding that it's relevant. Yep. And so I'm a researcher. I love writing. That's what I do. We also need folks to stand up so that it makes our work all that much easier when we're presenting the data. And so we need to present to communities who are demanding change, and we need to speak truth to power when it needs to happen. And so over the course of almost a year now, since COVID really set in, we've seen an uprising of sorts, and it's made our work that much easier. It's hard work regardless, but we need the facts, we need to act on the data. But Councilman McDuffie is absolutely right. We see the racism. We know it's there. It's not something of the past that is dead and gone. And so we need to hit it head on, both the past and the present, so that we can actually have the kind of communities that we know we can.
Dr. King in his final speech talked about we needed a bank-in movement. We see that even in the pandemic, when the federal government announced the PPP program, that Black businesses were not given loans. It's a forgivable loan program at the same rate. I see Rosie shaking her head to jump into the conversation here. There is more work to do, and we see the inequities even during the pandemic. So, Rosie, I'll turn to you.
No, I just want to, go back to what Dr. Perry was sharing when he talked about the data. You're absolutely right. The pandemic simply exacerbated what was already the challenge. I think that we can all agree that when it came to systemic racism and what we saw happening with the pandemic, we were really dealing with two pandemics. We were dealing with the pandemic of COVID, and we were dealing with the pandemic of systemic racism rearing its ugly head, as it has year after year after year in certain situations. But we have somehow chosen to live and try to get beyond them, but they always have a name. And this particular year in 2020, it was George Floyd, it was Ahmaud Arbery, it was Breonna Taylor. And so what we have to make certain that we look at what Dr. Perry sharing is the data. Because for those who choose to, as Councilmember McDuffie was saying, who choose to sort of kind of dilute it, then they will certainly not look at it by the numbers, because the numbers will always tell you where you need to be. And when you look at the data, for us at Your United Way, we are data-driven, we are evidence-based, and when we look at some of the statistics that have come our way, we too do studies, and one of ours is what we call the ALICE project. And ALICE is simply an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, but Employed. And these are many of our neighbors, our colleagues who are simply going to work every day, but because we happen to live in an area that is high cost, we find that they are disproportionately not able to access services, to be able to own homes, to be able to get affordable housing, no matter what you look for, where you look for it, and they're moving further and further away. And so it's about looking at what the data tells us. The data is going to tell you, no matter what the data point is, that African Americans are disproportionately impacted negatively on every statistic. And so if you're going to go where the need says you need to be, if you're going to do the work that you know is going to ultimately be impactful, you don't have a choice but to acknowledge that the racism is there, the disparity is there, it's institutional, it's long-suffering, and then we have an opportunity now to face it head-on and be able to actually do something about it. So I'm excited about this conversation, quite honestly. Look forward to where it goes even beyond today, and know that absolutely it is possible that we are able to move the needle on these challenges, on some of the toughest challenges that are facing our region writ large. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Corey, final thought?
Yeah, I was just, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was actually tinkering around on the internet, and I found an article written in 1996. And it was actually penned by Tucker Carlson, of all folks. He writes in this piece that from the turn of the century to 1968, Washington, D.C. had the largest black professional community in the United States. And in 1920, there were 40 blocks where you could find a concentration of 300 black businesses. I would submit to you today that we couldn't canvass this entire city and get to the number of 300. We just have a challenge in this area, and I think that when you think about the history, because today is about celebrating the black history, right? Uh-huh. And so in the context of the business, I think we've got so much work to do. And this is a great opportunity, this forum, and the others, the focus that the city and the council has had on this issue is making it possible for us to really identify the problems, the challenges, working with our partners and nonprofit partners to really change that and really get back to the sense of entrepreneurship that so many black folks in this country had mid-century and perhaps earlier. But we need to get back to that. We know that those things help to change and transform communities around the other things that we care about, public safety, wealth, those things. This is how you close it. We fundamentally believe that as a chamber, and we'd love to be able to work with the city to try to close that gap and again, thrive. We want to work with the city work with the mayor and deputy mayor across the city to make that change. Thanks.
Fantastic. Dr. Perry, final thought?
No, I just wanted to thank everyone who's involved in this event. Let's continue to keep working. I also want to say, happy Mardi Gras to all the folks out there who are from the Caribbean or live in New Orleans or in the Gulf region, grew up there. Happy Mardi Gras. But I say this all the time, that there's nothing wrong with black people that ending racism can't solve. We have the businesses that can scale. We have the talent. We don't have the investment. And for us, it's about the investment. So I'll be interested in working with City Council moving forward to see how we can capitalize these incredible businesses all across the city. Because it was stated earlier, we have a history of doing business, but there's also a history of racism that eliminates those businesses. And so we need to squelch those efforts to throttle black growth because it's really hurting everyone at the end of the day.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. And Councilmember McDuffie?
Sure. Let me just, again, thanking Mayor Bowser and thanking you, Deputy Mayor Pacheco, and all the folks who are part of this discussion. I think this is a great discussion. Look, I see this as an opportunity cost that we will miss if we aren't more intentional with our policy in making that investment that Dr. Perry just talked about, and that Rosie and Corey talked about, and others. The numbers are there. The data is clear. According to the national income of Black residents in the district increased by 175% racial equity. Racial equity. That will result in a 65% gain in GDP in D.C. And that will be the highest in any state in the nation, right? So we're talking about opportunity costs. Ultimately, though, our government must deliver an equitable recovery that isn't just a return to normal after this pandemic. For residents who've been left behind, they need to see that investment and be able to feel and touch it and know that the city is thinking about them. Investing in Black and brown communities isn't just the morally essential thing to do, it's also good economics, as I just talked about. And so I want to really emphasize that racial equity and economic inclusion aren't zero-sum games. Empowering these underserved communities and investing in Black businesses doesn't just benefit those communities of color, it benefits all district residents across the city. And that's important for everybody to know. And so I've appreciated this conversation again. And I'll leave everybody with just words of a wise man and really learned person, and that is the words of Dr. Andre Perry, who said, accounting for historical discrimination doesn't throttle white people's economic mobility. By becoming more inclusive, we can increase the size of the proverbial pie. And we've got to get to that point in the District of Columbia where we're increasing the size of the proverbial pie and including more people in our future economic growth. And so thank you again for this opportunity. I think this is a great discussion.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember. And Dr. Perry was shaking his head and agreeing with that. And
Yes.
It is a good one. I think we got to get that up on our website or put it out on social. It's a good one to leave the conversation with. I want to bring in Tim White for a final thought, and then I'll do some housekeeping items as well.
How do I follow a quote like that? But I'll say this, I follow it with a challenge. I know the folks here on this panel and the work that we do, we have, we get to focus on this every day. 2020, for better or for worse, definitely moved the needle on having this conversation more than just the shortest month of the year. And so I want to challenge everyone that is listening here to continue to have this conversation once we get to March 1st.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to everybody on the panel who joined us. Thank you for those who joined us online, who joined us on Channel 16 or on the phone line. Just a couple items for the business owners who are watching. We have another round of PPE available, so masks, disinfectants, wipes. Mayor Bowser has made another $2 million of that available in product. And you could actually learn more about how you can get that valuable, that needed PPE and those supplies by going to coronavirus.dc.gov/phase2. If you go to that site, you can find out how you could pick it up this Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. You got to sign up in order to pick it up, but it'll be available at the Convention Center and at Mapleview Flats in Anacostia. So those are two locations where you get that PPE, but be sure to sign up at coronavirus.dc.gov/phase2. Also, it is budget season, believe it or not. And so in order to advance this conversation, to Dr. Perry's point, for people to demand that we address equity, we have the budget engagement forums coming up. If you go to the Mayor.dc.gov website, you'll be able to sign up for the virtual budget engagement forums on Thursday evening at 6 p.m. and on Saturday morning as well. So please check out the links at Mayor.dc.gov in order to sign up for the budget engagement forums and to talk about what your priorities are for the next budget. With that, we ran over on time today. That's entirely fine because we had a lot of important items to talk about, a lot of important discussion. So I just want to thank our panelists for hanging in with us, and we'll see you again next week.